We continue now at the top of Daf Tesvavam at Beis Meseches Shevuos. This is Shevuos Daf 15b. On the previous Amud, Rami Bar Chama said that when they are Mekadesh the Azara, they do it specifically with the Shiyare Mincha. And the reasoning of Rami Bar Chama was that just like by Yerushalayim, they're Mekadesh Yerushalayim with the Lachmei Toda, which are eaten in Yerushalayim and cannot be taken out of Yerushalayim. So to the Azaras, they're Mekadesh the Azara by eating the Shiyare Mincha, which is something which is eaten in the Azara and cannot be eaten outside of the Azara. And the Gemara asked, if that is the case, so we should say just like the Lachmei Toda, which are Mekadesh Yerushalayim, are specifically chametz, maybe also the Shiyare Mincha should be chametz, but that's not even possible because there's no such thing as a karva mincha that's chametz. And the Gemara continues, V'chitem, and if you're going to say the machmetz lehu l'shirayim u'mekadesh behu, that just that remaining part of the mincha after they offer what they need to offer, the kometz, etc., on the mizbeach, after they offer that on the mizbeach, now they have these shirayim. Maybe at that point in time they turn it into chametz and they're mekadesh it in that fashion. V'aksib, but it's written in the pasuk lo seyafe chametz chelkam. We read the pasuk all together. They cannot be baked as chametz, and then the pasuk goes on to say chelkam nasati osame ishai. But we understand that chametz chelkam. V'yam Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish says afilu chelkam, even their portion, even the portion that's eaten by the kohanim, lo seyafe chametz, it cannot be chametz, so that would not be a solution either. And the Gemara continues and says, 1 second, but why not? Why can't we find a mincha which is chametz, which maybe is used to be mekadesh the azara? Because after the mekadesh b'shtei halechem b'atzeres, what about the shtei halechem on atzeres, on Shavuos? Those actually were chametz. So maybe we'll be mekadesh with those. The Gemara says, no, mishum de lo efshar, because that's impossible. Heichi ne'avid, what exactly will we do? How can we use the shtei halechem of Shavuos for this purpose? Nivniyeh me'esmol v'nekadshe me'esmol. If we're going to build, let's say we're adding on again to the azar, we'll do that from yesterday, meaning we'll do that before Shavuos and be mekadesh before Shavuos. But shtei halechem, that would be problematic, because the shtei halechem b'shchitas kevasim hu dekachi, they only become holy with the slaughtering of the kevasim, the slaughtering of the sheep, which takes place on Shavuos, so that won't work. And so then you'll suggest nivniyeh me'esmol, maybe we should build on whatever additions from before Shavuos, v'nekadshe ho'idna, and then we're going to say that the actual sanctification of that area will be today on Shavuos, but that won't work either. Ba'inon kiddush b'shas habinyan, you need to sanctify the area at the time that you're building it. And so the Gemara continues and says, what else can you do? Nivniya b'yomtiv, v'nikdashe b'yomtiv. Maybe you'll suggest, let's actually build it on yomtiv and sanctify it on yomtiv. That's not going to work. Ein binyan mikdash docha yomtiv. The building of the Beis HaMikdash is not docha yomtiv. You can't do that on yomtiv. And so the Gemara continues and says, nishbika levasar hachi v'nivniya v'nekadshe. So maybe what we'll do is we're just going to leave over the shtei halechem for afterwards, and then we'll build and then we'll sanctify, meaning we won't eat the shtei halechem on Shavuos itself. We'll leave it for the next day. That's a problem also if Salalei Belina, because that's going to disqualify them by staying overnight. And so then the Gemara says, so maybe you'll say Nivniya Mimale Yom, and maybe we should build it from before Yontiv, Unishayer Bei Porsa, but then just have a little bit remaining, a little bit that has to be built at the end. Da'ad de Kaddish Yoma La'alter Nigmare, and so then at the time that the day is over, immediately we'll finish V'nikdashe, and immediately we'll sanctify it, meaning to say you'll finish the building right after the Yontiv of Shavuos, and then you'll finish eating the shtei halechem at that point in time, so it doesn't stay overnight to the next day. Maybe that would be a solution, but that won't work either. Ein binyan Beis HaMikdash b'layla, because you can't build the Beis HaMikdash at night. The Yamar Abaye, because Abaye says minayin shein binyan Beis HaMikdash b'layla. From where do we know that one cannot build the Beis HaMikdash at night? Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk of Yom Hakim Es HaMishkan, it says on the day that the Mishkan is put up. B'yom Mekimo, in the daytime it's put up. B'layla ein Mekimo, at night it's not put up. Hilkach lo efshar. Therefore, to use the shtei halechem is impossible. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Uvashir, when they would consecrate the Azaros in Yerushalayim, they would do it with song. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbon, and the rabbis taught, Shir Shel Toda was the song of thanksgiving. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Bekinoros uvenavolim uvetziltzilim, they would use harps and lyres, and they would use cymbals. I'll call Pino, I'll call Evan Gedola Sheb Yerushalayim. They would be by every corner and every large stone in Yerushalayim. V'yomer, and they would also say, Aromimcha Hashem Kidi Lisani. They would say that section of Tehillim. V'shir Shel Pegoyim, and they would also say the Shir Shel Pegoyim. We'll see Rashi in a moment. V'yesh Omrin, Shir Shel Negoyim, and some say it's not referred to as Shir Shel Pegoyim, Pegoyim, but it's called Shir Shel Negoyim, which would be the Song of Plagues. Man Damar de Negoyim, the one that refers to it as Negoyim, Techsiv, because it's written in that part of Tehillim, V'nega lo yikrav ba'alecha, it mentions Nega, it mentions a plague. Uman Damar Pegoyim, and the one that says Pegoyim, Techsiv, because it's written over there, Yipol mitzidcha elef, that they should fall from your side, 1,000. V'yomer, and then they would also say, Yoshe b'seiser elyon, b'tzel shakai yislonon, ad ki ato Hashem machzi elyon, samta ma'onecha. They would say from Yoshe b'seiser until ki ato Hashem. V'chozer v'yomer, and then they would go back and say, Mizmor l'David b'vorcho, mipnei Avshalom b'no, Hashem ma'arab u'tzorai, ad la Hashem ha'yeshua, alam chavir chaseh chasela. They would say that Mizmor l'David until bir chaseh chasela. And Rashi explains, Tana Rabbanan Shir Shel Toda, the rabbis taught again the song of thanksgiving. Hayu Omrim Sham, that's what they would say over there, Bekinoros, with the harps. Umau Shir Shel Toda, now what is Shir Shel Toda? That's Mizmor L'Soda, that's referring to Mizmor L'Soda. And then they would say, Aramimcha Hashem, Hu Mizmor Shir Chanukah Sabayis. That's Mizmor Shir Chanukah Sabayis, talking about the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash, L'Kach Omro, so that's why that one would be said, it's relevant. V'Shir Shel Pegoyim is Yoshev B'Seiser Elyon. V'Shir Shel Pegoyim is the section of Yoshev B'Seiser Elyon. Ulefisha Amru Moshe B'Hakamas Mishkan, because Moshe said this when they put up the Mishkan. T'chsiv, because it's written, Vayivarech Osam Moshe, it says Moshe blessed them. Uma Birchan, and what was the bracha? He said, Yehi Ratzon Shetishra Shechina B'Maseh Yedei. He said that the Shechina should rest upon you, and so therefore that's why that was said. This is what it says in Torah's Kohanim. This is one of the 11 Mizmorim that Moshe says in Tehillim. Mitzvila L'Moshe ad sof Mizmor L'Soda. That's from Tefillah L'Moshe until the end of Mizmor L'Soda. And then it's referred to as Shir Shel Pegoyim. What's Pegoyim? Mazikin. Those are Pegoyim, are those that do damage. Shapogan b'vnei Adam lahazik, like demons that damage people, they cause damage against people. And Rashi continues, V'yomer Hashem Morab Utzoroi. They would also say the section of Hashem Morab Utzoroi. Lefi shenemar bo rabim umrim lenafshi ein Yeshuos lo ve'elokim sela. Because over here in this section, it talks about many who question the salvation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shayu mislods etzim Sara Yehuda v'nyamin k'shayu b'nei Yisrael. B'nei Hagola bon esachom. Many were mocking those who were building the wall, those of Klal Yisrael who were trying to rebuild. Shenemar, as it says in Nehemiah, Moha Yehudim hom lolam osim hayichyu esu avonim meirim osu afar v'hem asrufos v'yomer gam yalashul feretz chom asavneim. It says in the pasuk over there in Nehemiah that they were mocking them for trying to rebuild, and that's why this section is relevant. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Rav Yoshua ben Levi, Amar Luhu Lahani Kroi V'Goni. Rav Yoshua ben Levi, he would say these psukim, that's referring to the Shir Shel Pegoyim just mentioned above. Again, Yoshe b'Seiser Elyon, he would say that. He would say those psukim before he would go to sleep. It was in order to be a protection for him. And the Gemara says, Hey Chiyavid Hachi, how could he do this? V'Amar Rav Yoshua ben Levi, didn't Rav Yoshua ben Levi say, Asr lehisrapos b'divrei Torah, it's asr to use words of Torah as a way of healing? And the Gemara answers, Lahagin Shani, it's different if you're doing it for protection, that is okay. But the Gemara continues and asks, Ve'elaki Amar Asr, but when Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said it's Asr lehisrapos b'divrei Torah, so di'ikamaka, you're going to have to say that's talking specifically when there is a wound, because again, it's okay if it's for protection from a wound, but apparently it's Asr when there is a wound. But the Gemara says, di'ikamaka, but if he was talking about where there's a wound, so Asr v'sulo, it's prohibited, but there's nothing more than that, it's actually even worse than Asr. V'atanan, because didn't we learn in a Mishnah, halochesh al hamaka, if somebody whispers incantations over a wound, it's not simply Asr, but Ein Lo Chelek Le'olam Haba, the person has no Chelek in the world to come. And the Gemara continues and answers, Ho'itmar Aloy, it was said on that Mishnah in Sanhedrin of Ein Lo Chelek Le'olam Haba, that's talking only in a specific situation. Amar Rabbi Yochanan said on that Mishnah, Berokek Shanu, that's talking when the person first spits on the wound, Lefi She'ein Mazkirin Shem Shamayim Al Harakika, because you're not allowed to mention the name of heaven on spit, and that's why that was so severe in that particular situation. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Bezdin mahalchin ushtei todos acharei, and it said that Bezdin walks, and then the two Thanksgiving offerings, that follows the Bezdin. And the Gemara says, Lamemer, does this mean to say the Bezdin kame toda asli, that the Bezdin was walking in front of the Toda? V'aksib, but it's written in the pasuk in Nehemiah, when they did this again, it says, Vayelech achareim Hoshaya v'chatzi sar Yehuda. It says that Hoshaya and half of the officers of Yehuda went after them. It sounds like they followed. And the Gemara says that's actually how it goes. Hachi kamar, this is what we really mean to say. Bezin mahalchin ushtei todos mahalchos. The bezin would walk, and the two todos, they were also brought. Ubezin achareim, and the bezin, they would be the ones following. They would be in the back. And the Gemara says, Keitzad mahalchos, how exactly were the two todos, how were they brought? Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon beRebbi. It's a machlokus between Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon beRebbi. Chad amar zu keneged zu. One says they walked one next to the other. Rashi explains, zu keneged zu, shnei kohanim nosan osan, two kohanim carried these lachmei toda, zeh itzel them, and the two kohanim, zeh itzel zeh, they were one next to the other. The Chad amar, the other opinion says, zu achar zu, is actually one after the other, one of the lachmei toda went in front of the other one. And the Gemara says, Mando amar zu keneged zu, the one that says that they were next to each other. So it said in the Mishnah, one was called the inner one and one was called the outer one. So hapnimis hachta mekarva lechoma, the inner one would be the one that is closer to the wall. And Mando amar zu achar zu, the one that says that they walked one behind the other. So hapnimis, so the inner one would be hachta mekarva lebezdin. That would be the one that's closer to bezdin, because that would be in between the one in the front and the bezdin. In between would be called the panimis, the inner one. That would be the one again that is second, that is in the back. Rashi explains, Hachta mekarva l'choma, again, if they're next to each other, the one closer to the wall is the inner one. She panimis mumutzas beinam l'choma, because that's between the people and the wall. And Hachta mekarva lebezdin, the one, if it's one after the other, the one closer to the bezdin, haholeches achrona, which is walking in the back, then that would be considered to be the inner one. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Hapnimis ne'acheles, so it said with these lachmei toda, the inner one is eaten, v'hachitzona nisrefes, and the outer one is burned. So again, we have a machlokas here. What does it mean the inner one? What does it mean the outer one? And so the Gemara says, Bishlam alaman damar zu achar zu. Now this makes sense according to the one who says that one followed the other, so you had one in the front and one in the back. So amtu lahachi pnimis ne'acheles, it would make sense then to say that the inner one, which is really the back one, that's the one that's eaten. Misham Asya chitzona kama v'kachela, because the outer one, the one in the front, that goes in first, and it's mekadesh, the area first. Rashi explains v'kitshala rishona kitchas hamakom, that first of the lachmei toda that enters sanctifies the area which they're sanctifying. Ukeshenichnesa achrona l'sham, and then when the later one enters there, lo nifsala biyotze, so it's not going to be disqualified by leaving. Shalo avra b'makom chol ela b'makom mekudesh, because it only went in to an area, it never went into an area that was chol. It went into an area that was holy. So it would make sense to say then, again, in that situation, that it's the pnimis, that's the one that's going to be eaten. But according to the one who says they were right next to each other, so tarvayu bahade hadadi kamikdashi, so they're both sanctifying at the exact same time. Rashi says ki hadadi ninu, they're both together, shtein mekadshos yachad, they're both going to be mekadosh together. So if that's the case, so shtein yochlu, either eat both of them, or shtein yisrafu, or burn both of them, but again, they should both be treated equally. At least it would make sense if you say one follows the other. It would make sense to say, to treat one different than the other. And the Gemara continues and says, one second, but according to your reasoning, even according to the one who says one followed the other, so chadami mikdash, do you think that just one of them is creating the holiness? It says it has to be done with all of these. They're all mekadesh together. And even according to the one who says that with one of these things is enough, but hani tarvayu, but in terms of there's all these different parts of the process, but in terms of the lachmei toda, chada mitzvi, that's still considered all one mitzvah. So they are going to do it together anyhow, regardless of exactly how you learn in terms of b'chol elu or biachas mikol elu. And so the Gemara says, Elam Reb Yochanan, rather Reb Yochanan says, and Rashi explains, Afilu l'man da'amar l'kamon, even according to the one who says later, da'amar l'kamon, who says later on, d'chol elu d'masnis and achas mikulan ka'amar, that when it says all of the different parts of the process in the Mishnah, it means one of all of them. O melech, you can have either the king, O Kohen Gadol, or the Kohen Gadol, O Navi, O Sanhedrin, or you'll have the Navi, or the Sanhedrin, or Shtei Todos, or the Shtei Todos. Even if you read it that way, Hani Shtei Todos Mia Tarvayu Ba'inan, but still the two Todos, you're not going to have one Toda, it's going to be the two of them together. The Tarvayu Chada Milsi, because they're all considered to be one, and so again, it's going to be sanctified through the both of them, regardless of how you understand the Mishnah, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tezayin Amud Aleph.